Good. Okay, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee, including those watching online. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security door to my right or opposite the lifts in the foyer. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will be subsequently broadcast on the internet. Does anyone intend to film or record audio of the meeting? Thank you. Well, there's not many in the gallery, but I would advise that if filming takes place, anyone in attendance in the public areas may have their image captured. I urge anyone filming proceedings to avoid filming members of the public, particularly if there are children present. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber whilst this meeting is in progress. I don't currently have any members who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1, but is there anyone who would wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1? No. I have apologies from Councillor J. Bright. Do I have any other apologies? No. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Are there, any site visit will take place for committee members on the morning of Friday the 2nd of May, which moves me then into agenda item 3A, the planning application before us. Public speaking in favour of the application, Mr. Matt Hare, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Matt Hare, as you've heard. I'm the Planning Director of Axis Land Partnerships. We're the applicant for the matter before you today. The application seeks planning permission for delivery of Strategic Site Allocation Reference SP18 of the Council's local plan. This is a housing-led allocation, but also has requirements for a minimum of 11 hectares of open space, a site for a new primary school, and small-scale non-residential land uses. The application is in outline, with all matters reserved apart from access, but nonetheless is supported by a set of parameter plans that define the location and extent of key proposed land uses and other features of the development. Together, these plans define the master plan for the site. We propose provision of up to 1,461 new homes, and I'm pleased to say that 30% of those homes will be provided as affordable homes, in line with the Council's affordable housing policies. The proposals include provision of a new 2-form entry primary school and early years facility. This will be gifted to and taken forward by the local education authority. The proposals also include a local centre, which will provide up to 2,200 square metres of community use floor space and commercial, business and service use floor space. The proposals will deliver about 22 hectares of new publicly accessible open space. This is twice as much as the policy minimum required by the site allocation, and it exceeds the Council's minimum requirements for every open space typology relevant to the proposals. This will provide a huge social and environmental gain for the benefit not only of future residents of the scheme, but also of those living in the surrounding area. In environmental and biodiversity terms, the scheme is proposed to deliver a significant biodiversity net gain of roughly 18%. In part, this is achieved through provision of approximately 2 hectares of land on top of the 22 hectares already mentioned, to be managed as a nature area and free from human disturbance. Expressly proposed are works of enhancement to a section of Nash Road to increase its width and to deliver a new pedestrian and cycle infrastructure alongside. In addition, the development will make significant financial contribution of around £8 million towards the County Council's Inner Circuit Road project, and that's expected to be directed to the upgrade of the Manston to Hayne link of the circuit. In combination, this will deliver highway upgrades far beyond that required simply to mitigate the impact of the development and will therefore deliver significant benefit for the wider area. We began community engagement for the proposals in 2021 alongside informal engagement with the Council's planning team and other technical stakeholders. Throughout this process, we've engaged openly with all public stakeholders and we've worked constructively with technical consultees to ensure a high-quality scheme. It's due to this engagement-focused approach that the proposals have garnered minimal negative public representation, and you have no objections from technical consultees in front of you. Members, thank you very much for listening to me speak. I think that's about my 3 minutes. The officer recommendation is one of approval, and I hope very much that you'll feel able to vote in support of that recommendation tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will now hand over to the planning officers to outline the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So, as mentioned, the application is an outline application for up to 1,461 dwellings with a two-form entry primary school, a mixed-use centre which comprises use classes E, F1 and F2, and that's up to 2,200 square metres with associated infrastructure, green infrastructure, and with details included about the access to the site. So that means that the details of scale, design, appearance and landscaping are all reserved for future reserve matters submissions. So the main issues to consider really pretty much encompass most of the local plan in terms of principle of development, character and appearance, highways, environmental impacts including heritage, ecology, flooding, etc. And as mentioned by the applicant, there are a series of parameter plans which we'll show you through the presentation, which will dictate how the development comes forward with subsequent reserve matters. The application has also been accompanied by an environmental impact assessment as well. So this is the red line outlining the extent of the site. It's about 66 hectares. The blue line indicates areas that are within the applicant's control and ownership. In terms of the context of the site, we're in an area that members I'm sure will be very familiar with from previous applications, but we have the KCC waste and recycling site and the Manston Road depot, the TDC site. We've then got obviously the cemetery. We have the site that we'll look at briefly later, which is the 250 house site that members considered the reserve matters of within the last year. And then to the south of the site, we have the Westwood Cross housing site, which you can see from this satellite image is in the process of being built out. And then you have Manston Court Road at the bottom of the image with Westwood Cross in the bottom right hand corner. You've also got Manston Road running down here, and members will be quite familiar with this gap between Shottendane Road and Manston Road, because that's obviously the site of one of the other allocations in the local plan that's obviously came forward via the appeal and the public inquiry known as the Shottendane Road site. So in terms of where this site sort of sits in the sort of strategic overview of the local plan, it is one of the strategic policy allocations for housing. So obviously members will have obviously considered the Birchington site, we have the Westgate site, then you have the Shottendane Road site, which comprises the two parcels of land either side of Shottendane Road. This site is actually shown in two parcels. You've got one parcel that's in this area, I'm sure you can hopefully see the mouse pointer, and then the other parcel which is also being considered, which fronts onto Manston Court Road, is here, and then the Westwood Cross site, which is also a housing site, which is the originally Persimmon, then Linden Homes, now Vistry Homes, in this area here, and then the Westwood Village site, as it's known, to the south as well, and we'll go through some of those on this slide here. So this is an image that's been produced by the applicant in the submission, just to show again, the sweep of sites. The vast majority of the sites along this sort of corridor of development have got approval in either outline form or indeed reserve matters that have already come in and been approved. So in terms of the other strategic element that goes hand in hand with the overall strategic allocations for housing is the strategic routes policy, which is SP47, which primarily is safeguarding routes for the inner circuit, as it's known, put forward by KCC as part of their transport strategy for Thanet. So again, members will be very familiar with the western extent of it in terms of the Birchington site. So this site contains part of the strategic route which runs along Nash Road and cuts down and goes through onto Manston Road. So part of the strategic route goes through the Salmston Grange site, which is the 250 house site, and then the route then runs through then along down Nash Road, and then we'll talk later on about the Manston to Hayne link and the proposals for a sort of additional routes or upgrading of existing roads to provide a new link from the Hayne Road, the top of the Hayne Road corridor, through sort of Manston or round Manston out all the way to the Mount Pleasant roundabout to give an alternative route in and out of the district, avoiding effectively the Hayne Road corridor. So in terms of the strategic policy itself, SP 18, so this has specific criteria within it. I'll just quickly go through some of this. This is contained in the report in the principal section to go through each of these criteria. So the land is allocated for up to 1,450 new dwellings with an approximate average density of 40 dwellings per hectare, has to have a minimum of 11 hectares open space, fully serviced area of 2.05 hectares for a primary school, a range of community facilities including retail provision to serve the day-to-day needs of residents, links to new and existing public transport and infrastructure, highways improvements including the widening of Nash Road and links between Nash Road and Manston Road, and also out to the southern extent of the site to Star Lane, as well as requiring a proportionate contribution of towards the necessary off-site highway improvements. There are also criteria about master planning, which we will look at in a second. But I just wanted to start by talking about in terms of the principal section of the report and the two areas of which the proposal departs from the local plan allocation. So specifically there are two elements here. One is the extent of the site in terms of the red line in comparison to the allocation, and the other is the fact that there is an increase in dwelling numbers by 11 dwellings. So as I say, up to 1,461 dwellings rather than 1,450 dwellings. So taking the first point in terms of the extent of the site in the red line, so there are two particular areas where there are more significant deviations in the red line, and they're both at the north part of the site. So this is the red line of what's being proposed. You'll note that the blue line goes around Nash Court. So Nash Court is a grade 2 listed building with curtilage structures as well. This area here is contained within the allocation. So that was contained within the allocation for housing. That has been removed from the proposal. So that's been removed for a couple of reasons primarily. One is to try and preserve the setting of the listed building. There's also, to the north of this site, there are surface water drainage issues in the northern part of that site, which means that it's unlikely to come forward for development, and therefore it has been excluded on that basis. The other change with regards to the difference between the strategic allocation and the proposed red line is between Nash Road and the allotment site. So in this area here, you can see that for the allocation, there's pretty much a sort of a line down the middle between Nash Road and the allotment site at the north part of the site. Now that originally was because that land between the allotments and the red line was put forward to the local plan examination to be an expansion to the cemetery. During the examination, the inspector looked at the evidence that was provided by the council, the council department, and considered that the extent of land was not needed for the cemetery expansion plans. And what that's led to is that the strip that you can see actually in that sort of long, thin rectangle at the top there, which is in blue, that is the policy allocation that is now in the local plan for the cemetery expansion. However, what was left over when the plan was adopted was effectively a gap which was not allocated. So originally, the gap part that is there was going to be lost as farmland. It was going to be part of the cemetery expansion. So that is now been included within the application site. So that is the access from Nash Road that goes to the allotments at the moment. So the site, as you look at it, would be, you've got the area in question here on the right-hand side next to the access, with development effectively on proposed through the allocation on the left-hand side of the image and also the further extent of the image. And you can actually see the Persimmon Westwood Cross development, or as I say, Vistry Homes now, at the back there. So in terms of looking at this point, the report considers the loss of this what's effectively sort of open space but undesignated open space within the principal section in terms of the impact on the countryside. So that land is within the urban confines, but it is also farmland, and so the justification that's been put forward relates to providing a development that obviously doesn't incur in sort of go into an incursion into the setting of the listed building. It also allows for an improvement in the highways works, which we'll look at later in terms of the way the road sweeps around and goes into the site, which is the realignment of Nash Road. And the assessment in the report also looks at the loss of that farmland, of which would effectively be sterilised already by virtue of the allocation around it, and also the fact of originally it was always not going to be farmland. It was either going to be a cemetery expansion, and then obviously now has been lost in any event, potentially through this. So that's covered in detail. It's page 69 of the report. In terms of the increase in number of dwellings, as I'm sure I don't need to remind members now, but the council is obviously in presumption in favour of sustainable development under paragraph 11 of the NPPF, with 67% in our most recent housing delivery test, and therefore the increase in number needs to be considered in terms of the merits and whether or not that number and that increase in number has any significant harm in terms of impact on landscape, impact on all of the issues that we talked about, that I mentioned at the top of the presentation. So, to quickly go through the master planning of the site and how the site has come before members. This is an aerial view, just an isometric view to show the extent of the site. So you can see in three places across the middle of the site, you have the 132 kilovolt overhead power lines across the site. So that's one part of the master planning that it needs to be looked at as part of the policy. There are also down here, there's a 33 kilovolt overhead power line, which is proposed to be made underground as part of the scheme. And this is showing those the utilities provisions across the site produced by the applicant as part of the master planning. So you can see the way that the overhead power lines across the site, and then the one that sort of cuts across the Westwood Cross housing development and then cuts across the bottom part of the site to the very bottom of the image. We are going to go through all these points, so I appreciate there's a lot of information on this one, but this is part of the design access statement to show the constraints on the site and how then that's resulted in the master planning that's come forward. So just to touch on some of these key issues that we're going to talk about when talking about some of the larger issues. So again, Nash Court and the farm that's here in terms of the listed building, you can see the areas of blue, the actual surface water drainage point. You also have the specific areas of surface water drainage around the edge of, sort of close to the edge of the site where the KCC recycling centre is. You also have the area of the power lines, as mentioned, that cut across the site. You have this area here, which through the work as part of the environmental impact assessment would be a buffer zone to the cement works, which are found in this area here. You have Half Mile Ride, which is a bridle way that cuts across the site. So you have got certain constraints, as well as the pockets of archaeological finds that have been looked at as part of the geophys and the preliminary work that's been done as part of the EIA, that effectively has mandated where the development can go on the site. And so that has resulted in this parameter plan, which is the land use parameter plan, to just give you an overview of where the pockets of development are proposed to go and how all of those areas are safeguarded or mitigated. So specifically, you can see in terms of the west of this image, you can see the green space that's here is to provide a combination of a nature area in this area here, and we'll talk about ecology later. You've then got a buffer around the existing commercial uses, including the KCC waste and recycling site and the cement works here. You've then got these sort of green fingers and these routes that run through the site. That relates primarily to surface water drainage as well as the public rights of way that cross the site. You've then got the newly aligned Nash Road, so coming off the top of Nash Road on the north of the site, and the top of the image that you can see here, wrapping round. You've then got the area of Nash Road that we'll look at in terms of the widening and improvement, so that is also included in the site. And then going down, wrapping around the Westward Cross housing site that's currently under construction, before it then fronts onto Manston Court Road to the south of the site. So what that looks like in terms of an illustrative master plan, you have, this is obviously shown as to how you can actually get the development on the site. In the centre of the site is where the primary school location and also the local centre are approved. So they are not going to be proposed to be on Nash Road. There is a secondary spine road that we'll look at in the movement and access plan, which will run off Nash Road, where both of those uses will be accessed. Again, this is effectively the parameter plan is indicating where those things are, but obviously the detail of those will come through subsequent reserve matters. So I'm going to hand over to Annabelle now to talk a bit about the character and appearance of the development.
Sorry, thank you. As has been mentioned, I'm going to look at density, which is one of the parameter plans that have been submitted. And as has been mentioned, the policy SP18 sets an average density for 1,450 dwellings of 40 dwellings per hectare. So this is the density parameter plan. The darker areas being the higher density, so that this is the community hub that's been mentioned, so that's quite high density, and it works its way out to the lighter areas being the lower density. So there are 5 density ranges in total across the site, but they do average out and give a site-wide density of 40 dwellings per hectare. If you would just look at the developable part of the site, but if you do include all the site, including the green infrastructure and open spaces, that drops down to 23 dwellings per hectare. So this is another density plan which has the density figures set out, and it will be a bit difficult for members to read, unfortunately. But again, as has been mentioned, the darkest area has the highest density, and this dark brown area just below where the school would sit, and has an approximate density of 63 dwellings per hectare. And as been mentioned, it forms a community hub with other areas close to Westwood Cross, to Westwood, also having a fairly higher density of approximately 46 dwellings per hectare. But as would be expected, as you move to the areas that are closer to the open space and to the countryside in general, the density drops down. To these sorts of areas here, the lighter, very lightest colour here, being something in the region of 31 dwellings per hectare. And as has been mentioned, they do all equate when factored in together to give an average of 40 dwellings per hectare. The surrounding area has a range of densities in existing residential development. There's more historic areas of terraced housing surrounding the site that have densities up to 75 dwellings per hectare, and post-war housing developments, housing estates which have lower densities, which come down to anything up to down to 24 dwellings per hectare. The density of the adjoining site that's been mentioned down here, that's being built out currently, has a range of densities of 35 to 42.5 dwellings per hectare, with the area closest to this site comprising a density of 40 dwellings per hectare. So given those facts, the proposed density and the proposed density of the site hitting the 40 dwellings per hectare, it is considered to be acceptable in terms of meeting the requirements of policy SP18 to get an efficient use of the site, and also acceptable in terms of its impact on the character and appearance of the surrounding area. So looking at another parameter plan, this is the building heights parameter plan. Whilst we don't have, at this outline stage, the scale and detail of all the dwellings, we have the parameter plan to guide what will come forward in the future at the reserved matter stage. So this is similar in the way it's been laid out as to the density parameter plan, in that the darker areas are the highest, have the higher building heights. So this area, the community hub, would be up to 3 stories in height. The sort of mid-brown character is either 2 or up to 2 stories in height. And this area, as you come out, the very lighter areas would be 2 stories in height, again where they meet the countryside or other developments such as the bungalows and chalet bungalows at Manston Court Road in this location. The 3-storey development is limited and reflects more modern development in the surrounding area that does include 3-storey elements. There are some on Star Lane and residential development in that sort of area. And it is considered that it would help provide a focal point for the development and identify its community hub. The buildings of up to 2.5 stories are, as I say, this sort of mid-brown colour, and they would be centrally located within the application site and also where they'd be close to areas of existing residential development. In the more sensitive areas, as we touched on, they are 2 stories in height and would be limited to that. This approach is considered to be acceptable, and it takes into account the sensitivities of surrounding development, and including this development as currently being built out, which at its closest point to this part of the application site is 2-storey. The school building is this orange area here, and it's shown on this plan as being having a building height of up to 12 metres. This is actually at the request of KCC, which would allow the building to have a heightened sports hall, which would allow for community use and the creation of an area where sports such as badminton can be played. Given its location and the fact that it is a requirement of KCC, it is considered that the height of 12 metres is considered acceptable for the school site. So I'm just going to excuse me, take you through some of the landscape character areas that are within the site, and they aim to sort of break down the bulk of the development and give individual areas different characters and different identities. So there are 6 character areas proposed within the development, and they're shown in the different colours on the plan on the left-hand side here. The lanes character area is probably the most prominent, for want of a better word, character area, and it's known as the lanes, and there's a sort of detail of the sort of things that could be found and expected to be found in the lanes character area. But to give you some bullet points about this character area, it would primarily consist of semi-detached and terraced houses with some flats and detached dwellings. There would be 2-storey dwellings where it is close to, for example, Nash Farm, but would be up to 2.5 stories elsewhere. And there's an emphasis on riverman repetition with parking, a mix of driveway and frontage and some parking courts. The countryside and greenway views character area is the green notation on this plan, and is again another prominent character area which goes throughout in different parts of the site. And this is a sketch, a view of how this sort of character area may would appear. So it's a mix of terrace and semi-detached and detached with some flats. It is essentially next to either the open countryside, it would be 2-storey, elsewhere it would be up to 2.5 stories. It has a less urban character than the lanes, with more organic building lines and with buildings having front gardens. Tree planting and hedge planting would be provided, and that would link the character areas to the open countryside surrounding it, or the open space that sort of wraps around it. So the avenue is shown on red, and it's quite prominent, but character area as you enter the site. And there's an image here of how the avenue would look on the top right-hand corner of the slide. So dwellings here would be predominantly terraced with some flats and some detached dwellings, and they would be up to 2.5 stories in height. They would be high density with a formal character and consistent characters, and formal planting would be provided along it with things like avenue tree planting, as you can see in this view here. Mill Terrace is this small pink notation here, and there is an image of how that might look to the bottom left of the slide. Essentially, they would be terraced or stroke linked houses with some flats. They'd be 2.5 stories in height and high density. Planting here would be semi-formal to soften the transition between these dwellings and the open space that they sits beyond them. So the Nash character area is this yellow site, so you've got a bit here and a little bit of it in this location here. And again, there is an image of how that might be come forward at the top right-hand side. It's a small area, as we can see, and it's located opposite Nash Court Farm, predominantly semi-detached and detached, with some terrace buildings. Close to Nash Court Farm, it would be 2 stories in height. Elsewhere, it would be up to 2.5 stories. It is semi-formal in character, with large front gardens, with semi-formal planting, and to help create and reflect the rural feel of Nash Court Farm. The other character area that has been shown is this large purple area, which is essentially the community hub and school site. Excuse me. It would be up to 3 stories in height, and there would be commercial uses at lower levels. The school, as we've discussed, would be up to 2 stories in height, with potentially that larger element of the sport hall for 12 metres in height. There would be consistent building lines and high density with formal planting. Whilst the application is an outline form, the character areas, as has been mentioned, are introduced to avoid a bland and blanket appearance to the larger development, and the conditions are imposed that future reserve matters would comply with the proposed character areas and have their basis on the document and plan before us. So just a quick look at living conditions. As with all residential applications, it is important to assess the impact of the development on surrounding occupiers, as well as ensuring that good standard of occupation for future occupiers. As an outline application, we're not considering the detailed layout of dwellings or buildings at this stage, so the specific impact in terms of like where windows might be, etc., are not being considered at this time, but we have looked at density and building heights generally. So details of the relationship between dwellings, such as those existing dwellings on Manston Court Road, as well as Nash Court Farm and other areas, need to be assessed. And it is considered that there is sufficient land available on site that a good relationship could be created between the dwellings on the application site and the surrounding development. So there is not considered to be any reason why an unacceptable impact would occur on living conditions of surrounding occupiers, but that would be assessed at at the reserve matter stage. As can be seen and has been mentioned, this is the KCC Waste and Recycling Centre, the cement works and the Manston Road depot shown here. A noise and vibration assessment was submitted as part of the ES supporting the application, which considered both the construction phase of the development and its operational phase 2. Environmental Health agreed with the methodology of the submitted assessment and its findings. With good practice and also the securing of an appropriate mitigation measures through the submission of a construction environmental management plan, it is considered the impact on adjoining occupiers would be acceptable, and that management plan is secured by a condition. It is appreciated that there would be some noise and disturbance during the construction phase, but it's not considered to be significantly harmful if it was properly managed, as would be secured by that condition. But as has been mentioned, we do have these non-residential neighbours to the site, and paragraph 200 of the MPPF is important in that it states that planning decisions should ensure that new development can be integrated effectively with existing businesses and community facilities, and they should not have unreasonable restrictions placed upon them as a result of new development permitted after they are established. So essentially, where the operation of existing business or facility could have a significant adverse effect on new development in its vicinity, it is for the applicant of that new development to provide suitable mitigation to prevent the adverse implications on those existing businesses. So concerns were initially raised by KCC about this application, in that they were concerned that their existing operations could be compromised by the introduction of residential development in close proximity to the site. The noise and vibration assessment considered these existing businesses and looked at measures to prevent any impact on the operation of them. So, I'm sorry. Apologies, going the wrong way. So the nearest residential development to those businesses will be in this location here and this location here. So the mitigation measures that have been put into place are a landscape buffer around the site, a 3 metre high bund with a 3 metre high barrier to the eastern and southern boundaries of the cement works, as well as additional mitigation measures that would still be required in the individual design of the closest dwellings to the site, just to make sure that they aren't impacted significantly by any noise and disturbance from the existing businesses. There are a number of conditions relating to noise that are included in the conditions, and they include condition 46, which requires an acoustic design statement to accompany each reserved matters, and also the requirement for the bund that's been mentioned, which is condition 43. It is considered with these measures in place and safeguarding conditions that future occupiers of the development will have a good standard of accommodation, and there would be no unreasonable restrictions on the operation of the existing businesses. So looking at heritage assets, firstly we'll look at the built form listed buildings and other things that are mentioned on the Kent Historic Environment records, and then we'll look at archaeology separately. So this slide shows the listed buildings and as has been mentioned, other heritage assets that form part are identified on the Kent Historic Environment record. So you have, for example, Nash Farm in this location here, the cemetery with several listed structures and memorials in that location. There are no designated heritage assets actually within the application site, but it would have been, members I'm sure would have seen that the application involves the demolition of 2 barns and the partial demolition of a third at Nash Court Farm, and that is to facilitate highway works to Nash Road. The Council's Conservation Officer has advised that although these barns appear historic, they are not designated heritage assets, given that they have undergone significant alterations over time, and they do not raise any objection to them being removed. KCC's archaeological team has also raised no objection to their removal, but has advised that they should be recorded prior to their demolition. So there is a condition for building recording on the application. So in terms of off-site heritage assets, the impact of the development has been assessed by the applicants in their heritage statement. Nash Court Farm has been mentioned is probably the closest building that potentially could, heritage asset that could be impacted by the development. The farmhouse itself is Grade 2 listed and there are other curtilage listed buildings around it. And policy P18 required the master plan to be informed by and address the preservation of the setting of the listed building. And as has been mentioned previously that Nash Court Farm was itself within the it is within the allocation, but has been removed from the application site. The Conservation Officer welcomes the fact that it has now been removed from the application site, and the landscape buffer that will be provided around it and at the edge of the application site itself to soften the impact of the proposed development on the farm, and they raise no objection. They do acknowledge there will be some harm to its setting given the large-scale nature of the application, but it's considered that this harm is less than substantial and outweighed by the benefits of the development. The other site of consideration where there are a number of Grade 2 and Grade 2 star and Grade 2 heritage assets is the cemetery. So Historic England were consulted, and as with the Conservation Officer, they concluded that any harm to those heritage assets would be less than substantial. Historic England did in particular raise some concerns about the multi-use game area, which is proposed roughly on the open space in this location here, because they had some concerns that people using that area might disturb the quiet reflection and of people paying their respects at the cemetery. But given the enclosed nature of the cemetery, the physical and visual separation of the listed memorials within the cemetery and the application site, together with the proposed landscape buffer, this harm is found again to be less than substantial and again is outweighed by benefits of the development. The exact position of the mugger, the multi-use games area, has not been fixed at this point in time, and it would come forward in one of the reserve matters application at a later date. So there is some scope potentially for that to be considered at that point in time, and whether there would be any harm from that being in close proximity to the cemetery. So we'll look at archaeology now, and this plan actually shows the application site and all the bits that have been found within the application site. There is also the scheduled ancient monument Samston Grange, which is within 1 kilometre of the application site, but it is not found that there's been significant harm given the distance and the intervening development between the scheduled monument and the application site. Again, the application is supported by an archaeological assessment, and these are the findings from it. KCC Archaeology has reviewed the assessment and agrees with its methodology and findings. They agree that the most important heritage assets discovered are the Bronze Age ring ditches, the Bronze Age barrow linear feature and prehistoric oval enclosure, and these are pretty much in these locations here, this location here, and up here. So these are assets, as has been shown are actually located in areas identified as open space, and that's partly been informed by the fact that these archaeological features have been found, as well as other factors that dictate where development can be carried out. And condition 11 actually seeks to archaeological exclusion zones around these most important heritage assets, allowing them to be preserved in situ. So this condition 11 sits with several others relating to archaeology, and they are conditions 10 to 14 in the report, and they include as the recording of the barns that will be demolished, and also things like archaeological interpretation boards, so a great understanding of the things that have been found can be made publicly available. So it is again acknowledged that there would be some harm to archaeological assets from the proposed development, but again, in weighing it up, it's considered to be less than substantial, and this harm is considered to be outweighed by the benefits of delivering the strategic allocated site, and subject to safeguarding conditions, the proposed development is unlikely to have a significant effect on archaeology. So I'll just hand you back to Ian to carry on with the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Annabelle. There we go. There we go, my mouse is working. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about green infrastructure and then run through biodiversity and drainage. So in terms of the next parameter plan to look at, it's the green infrastructure plan. So this is indicating the areas where there will be open space, where development will not be constructed. So we have in the star area next to the cement works, but between the dwellings and the cement works, for a location for allotments. You then have a mugger that's in that location as well. The yellow that surrounds this area is structural planting, and obviously mention's been made to the bund to be erected along that boundary as well. You then have the area here, which is the going to be sort of created for it's the chalk hole farm roadside nature reserve at the moment, which we'll look at in a bit more detail, but that area is the area which won't be available for public access as part of trying to enhance the biodiversity of that area. You've then got these green pockets within the bulk of the housing development, the structural planting which then runs all the way around the site to Manston Court Road, and then you've got the alignment of the road again with then a local equipped area of play and a neighbourhood equipped area, a NEEP, in the area next to Nash Court. So in terms of the specific typologies of open space, so policy GI04 looks at, for strategic applications, a general idea of proportions of different types of open space that need to be provided. So amenity green space, equipped and designated play areas, public parks and gardens, allotments, and natural and semi-natural green spaces. So this is outlined in the report with the requirement that comes through the application effectively needing a little bit more actually than the 11 hectares that's stated in the policy, about 12 hectares on the basis of working out census data, but the application has increased above each individual typology to provide about 6 hectares of amenity green space, 0.9 hectares of designated equipped play areas, public parks about 3.4 hectares, allotments of 0.7 hectares, and natural and semi-natural green space of about 10.9 hectares. So the image on the left-hand side, as you can see it, identifies those specific typologies. So the natural and semi-natural green space is in green, so you can see the bulk of that is to the west, because that's the area that's being looked at in terms of the biodiversity enhancements, because of how it connects to the open countryside and also how it surrounds the chalk hole nature area. That area is shown and is additional to that those open space typologies, which is the area in I'm going to say orangey beige. Then you've got the SUDS features which are dotted through the site, which relates to the surface water drainage strategy, which we'll look at. Then the amenity green space, the areas that can be used more prevalently for dog walkers, etc., are the sort of purpler areas and the routes that link to where you've got the public rights of way. Before then you get the public parks and gardens, of which are predominantly located around where the play areas are, so at the north of the site, next to where Nash Court is here as well. Now, the image on the right-hand side is giving a bit more detail about how the different play areas that are proposed around the site in terms of the landscape strategy are covering the residents of the development. So I appreciate it's a bit of it's a lot on the drawing, but obviously the dotted lines basically indicate a radius around the different types of play areas. So you've got your local area for play, so which doesn't involve equipment but is generally for very, very young children. You've then got slightly older children for the equipped play areas, of which there are 3 dotted around. You've then got the one neighbourhood equipped play area, so with at least 8 play experiences for more, I suppose, more teenagers, which is going to be in the area next to Nash Court, which is more of the sort of public park and garden part. And then there are 2 multi-use games areas that are proposed. One, as mentioned, around where the allotments are on next to Half Mile Ride, and then one down the southern part of the site, closer to Manston Court Road. So on the basis of the strategy, we do consider there's a spread of these play areas across the site. We think that actually it would provide decent play experiences around. Obviously, the detail of all of this will be looked at through reserve matters applications and also within an open space framework plan, which would be required to be submitted which is condition 39, which basically requires the information to come in to basically show how all these areas will knit together when it comes to the reserve matters applications, and that has to come in prior to or subsequently with the first reserve matters. It has to give the strategy, and then every subsequent reserve matters that comes in has to accord with condition 40, which basically has then a open space specification for that phase, which shows how it's complied with that framework, and that framework has to be based on what you're seeing in front of you. So this is an idea of the landscape strategy. It's a bit more of a sort of illustrative way of showing what we've just looked at. So again, as mentioned, the concepts, I suppose, behind that in terms of the strategy would be that the area on the right-hand side, which is more of the dark blue, is more of the area where there is the natural and semi-natural grassland sort of areas, the green corridors through which are down in pink, with then the open space for public parks, the green through the site where you've got the play areas for an activity trail. You've then got the key play area and linked to a SUDS feature next to Nash Court on the west of the site, and then the allotments that are in orange, with then south of that it's been termed a heritage park. Obviously that's where Bronze Age ring ditches and various other areas which are excluded from development by virtue of the archaeological remains that are going to be preserved in situ. So in terms of biodiversity, there is an assessment within the EIA which looks at the habitats on the site. You can see from this image here, the cereal crop is the areas which have the horizontal orange line across the white. So the vast majority of the site does not have habitats which support all types of protected species, but we'll come back to birds in a little bit. But a particular interest from the work that was done in the build-up to the planning application related really to, I suppose, 2 particular points on the site. One, as mentioned, is the Chalkhole Roadside Nature Reserve. So this is calcareous grassland, which if you look at the insert, which is at the bottom left of the image that you can see, it's the green and yellow strip along Fleet Road, which effectively is a grassland which supports wildflowers through having soils that are rich in calcium carbonate, which and also along that stretch there's a plant called wild clary which has purple flowers and is particularly important for pollinators. So as part of the EIA, it's been identified how important that is, which is why there's got to be a 50-metre buffer around it where no development can take place, and where basically the landscape strategy and the subsequent reserve matters will not show public footpaths going into it. Now, obviously, there's already a road next to it, so that's not going to change, but there aren't going to be any accesses to Manston Road through that area, which is why there's no road access to Manston Road in that area particularly. Also, KCC Highways didn't want a road access to come off the site onto Manston Road for traffic flow reasons. So the other issue that's come up through the detailed surveys particularly came about with the botanical survey that was carried out, where some lizard orchids were found in the area that's dotted in blue on the eastern boundary of the site with the neighbouring site, which is obviously being developed for dwellings at the moment. And similarly, again, if I go back to, sorry, I'm going to have to go back a little bit. This is an area which has a landscape buffer where no development will be placed in that area, and both of those issues have been looked at by KCC Biodiversity and consider that the mitigation and the strategy and the parameter plan would provide sufficient mitigation to avoid an impact on those particular points. In terms of some of the detailed survey work that's been done with regards to other species, there were common bats found with 7 particular roosts that were found in terms of bat surveys. There are a couple of conditions which relate to how the impact on bats is going to be mitigated. One relates to a condition that 10% of the buildings have to support integrated bat roosts within them. There's also a lighting strategy condition which is specifically trying to ensure that within the green corridors of the site, lighting will be controlled with areas other than the only area which can't be controlled quite so much, which is the new road, which is Nash Road, in terms of the lighting because of needing to hit highway safety standards. But the lighting in the other areas of the green corridors will be controlled with a condition which requires the lighting scheme to be submitted and subsequent phasing plans when they come in for the reserve matters to accord with the lighting strategy. Then have reptile habitats. There are potential habitats that are found on the boundary of the site by virtue of, obviously, that's where various different species sort of habitats are found. Ultimately, those boundaries are being retained pretty much as they are with the buffers around them. The habitats themselves are not threatened through the application. In terms of breeding birds, so impact on farmland birds is a consideration with this application. Various surveys have been done. So concerns from KCC Biodiversity were put forward through the consultation with regards to the impact on skylarks specifically. So obviously we've talked about this a few times when it's an allocated housing site. There is going to be an impact clearly on farmland birds by virtue of putting the number of houses that the site's been allocated for on the site, but it's about whether or not the site can accommodate any form of mitigation within either open space or in how it links to open space outside the site to be able to increase foraging ability for species like skylarks. In this instance, there's been quite a lot of back and forth with KCC, and specifically what's been resolved is to ensure there is a management plan condition which looks at, there are 3 particular conditions, 35, 36 and 42, which is the general landscape management plan condition, which cover the management of the chalk hole nature area, which if I go back here, which is the area in pink, I'm going to say, on the left-hand side of the image, to look to ensure that foraging opportunities are provided for skylarks, as well as the fact that this is obviously located adjacent to an area of open space and open farmland to be able to mitigate the impact. In terms of wintering birds, so it's the same point. It's an allocated housing site, and through the local plan, there were multiple surveys that were done over a period of years to work out whether or not this site constituted functionally linked land to the special protection area and the designated sites around Thanet Coast with regards to the qualifying species. Specifically, in terms of the surveys that normally throw up on this relate to golden plover. In this instance, the surveys have been carried out, and we have had Natural England agree to the work that's been carried out in the surveys that have been done. There is a shadow habitat regulations assessment that accompanied the application, which considered the impact on designated sites under the habitat regulations. So that's obviously the process that has to be gone through and complied with, as well as planning permission being granted. In that instance, the shadow HRA within the appropriate assessment concluded that, subject to a contribution towards the Strategic Access Management and Monitoring Plan, or the SAM, as well as providing a landscape strategy which includes walking routes within the site, that it is sufficiently would mitigate the impact of recreational disturbance on the special protection area, and that has been agreed with by officers and as mentioned by Natural England. And so the recommendation includes the adoption of that, and that's contained at Annex 3 of the report. There's also, as mentioned, the aim to achieve 18% biodiversity net gain across the site. This application came in before the statutory requirement for biodiversity net gain, so it is not required by virtue of the Planning Act to have to provide 10%. However, the application does propose to increase the habitat units across the site, as well as increasing hedgerow units across the site. Now, there will be some loss of hedgerow on the site by virtue of where the new bund has to go around the cement works. However, that is being offset by the planting to occur elsewhere. And again, KCC Biodiversity have commented that at this stage there's sufficient information, but there needs to be an ecological enhancement strategy that's provided, again, before the first reserve matters comes in, which then subsequent reserve matters have to show how they are according with that strategy to provide 10% overall. And so, subject to safeguarding conditions, we consider that that has been sufficiently mitigated. So turning to drainage and surface water drainage, first of all, there is a drainage statement that's been submitted, which has been looked at by the KCC as the local lead flood authority. Primarily that looks at infiltration for surface water drainage across the site, so no additional flows into the foul water drainage system. And as with most sites, that relates to looking at a combination of swales and infiltration basins where necessary. In terms of the conditions with regards to this, there are two conditions, condition 19 and condition 20, which look at this, and these are the ones that have been specifically requested by KCC, which will require for a detailed strategy to be provided for the actual site-wide drainage strategy, and then subsequent reserve matters having to again provide a statement to show how they've accorded with that strategy. The KCC required some additional work to occur when that strategy comes in. Specifically, that was looking at additional groundwater monitoring that had to be done, but they were happy with the strategy and providing the deep boreholes that were being proposed to be looked at when the strategy is further detailed as the reserve matters come forward. In terms of, I'm sorry, I haven't showed you the actual surface water drainage across the site. So very briefly, this is using the now very new EA flood maps that have been provided that have gone live, looking at surface water drainage specifically and the annual likelihood of flooding from surface water drainage. So the site is located pretty much in the centre. In terms of 1 in 30, what that means is that basically there's 3.33 reoccurring chance in 1 year that there would be flooding in the areas shown. So you have this pocket here, which then when you get to a 1% chance in a year, it increases in size. And then when you move onto a 0.1% chance in a year, you then have this route that runs down here. Now, it's worth noting that within the actual, you can see this is the applicant, this looks at the actual risk, again, in terms of surface water, and shows actually the extent of then high risk being in that area, and then it lessens as you go out. So in terms of the surface water flooding that occurs on the site, it's relatively low, it's very low in terms of its likelihood, but in any event, that area is not the area to be developed. It's specifically excluded from being developed in that area. And sorry, just to confirm that point in terms of the area is down as obviously as the open space that runs through the site, and this is why there's this route, this green route that runs through here to accommodate for those potential flows. So just to touch on foul drainage, so the proposal is looking to use gravity drainage to go to existing connection points, and where that's not possible, to have pumping stations on the site. Now, there is a capacity assessment that's been submitted with the application. Southern Water were involved in that capacity assessment originally, and they've subsequently commented on the application, and it's clear that network reinforcement is going to be needed to accommodate this site when it comes forward to provide additional adequate capacity. And on that basis, there is a condition, which is condition 21, which specifies that no development on any phase shall occur until details of the foul water drainage for that phase have been provided, which will obviously allow us to look at the improvements and the connection points and what's being proposed to deal with individual phases. And then there's no occupation on that phase until that work has been completed. Now, obviously, we've talked before about the requirements of the Water Industry Act, and obviously that Southern Water are obligated to provide a connection, but at the point in which the developer approaches them, they are then required to plan for the enhancements that are needed on the network. Southern Water were obviously consulted on the local plan. They are very aware through that consultation of where the housing development is going in the district, but obviously there is this safeguard of the condition which will require these details to be submitted. So, we're going to talk about highways. So this is the parameter plan for movement and access. So the application has been accompanied by a transport assessment, which is a requirement of policy SP18, with extensive discussions over the last 2 years since the application's been in with KCC and the applicant. So the parameter plan, just to outline this, you have, as mentioned, the access points here. You've got an access point right at the top of the image here on Nash Road. You then actually have another access point which is at the end of Nash Road, where it sort of starts to join the roundabout where Star Lane is here. You've then got an access point on Manston Court Road. You've then got three public rights of way through the site, 2 bridleways, which is TM 11 and TM 16, and then the footpath public right of way, which is TM 17, crossing the site as well. So in terms of the transport assessment and talking about capacity, so the transport assessment has used the KCC Saturn model, which was built specifically for the local plan, to be able to understand how the network can deal with the capacity from the increased numbers of housing up to 2031, so the 17,140 houses, specifically looking at the actual strategic allocations themselves. So when modelling the traffic flows across the district, this site specifically looked at 2 particular scenarios that are worth touching on. One is an additional scenario that was created for 2026, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and another one for 2031. And as mentioned, so that's all the strategic allocations, the number of movements, and it also accounts in 2031 scenario for all the strategic improvements on the network. So it also includes the inner circuit itself. Now, as I think everyone in this room knows, all of the houses in the local plan from all the strategic allocations are not going to be built by 2031, but it obviously has to model on the basis of the evidence that we've got, and also that model is, I suppose, is a worst case scenario in terms of how the network would fall over at that point in time if all the development is there. So page it's 107 in my report, but it's in the transportation section, outlines where specific junctions were looked at within the transport assessment, which specifically looked at the Star Lane priority junction, Nash Road and Star Lane roundabout, the Manston Court Road new access, and also the Nash Road, as it was, the signalised shuttle working. So talking specifically then about Nash Road and the realignment of Nash Road. So in terms of the realignment, so the detailed route it will be outlined as part of reserve matters applications, but what has been looked at is the connection point to the north of the site. So looking then at that connection point, you have the existing highway in yellow that you can see there. So that's what Nash Road does at the moment. So what's being proposed here is that a new junction is put to allow for access down to Nash Court, with then the road coming round the corner into effectively the middle of the site. So what you will struggle to see, but what's been looked at by KCC is whether or not there is sufficient visibility splays at this point for the new junction. You also have a 3 metre wide footway on one part of, on the western half of that new road as it comes through. Before then, you've got some tactiles that then would have 3 metre wide footways on either side of the new road as you go through the site. So that provides a pedestrian and cycle route, because that's the width that KCC require for that dual use. So just looking at some of the tracking, just to show that that junction works, this is with a refuse truck to just prove that that operates correctly. So this is the site on Salmston Grange. So as part of the transport strategy, it's about providing a new access roundabout on Manston Road that then effectively means that there's a new link road which bypasses the existing Nash Road, which would then join on to the link road. And then the very right-hand side of this is where you get onto this site. So you can see the road alignment runs around before then at this point here, so you can see in terms of the detail, before then it continues on into this site. And so this is an image actually just showing where that site is. That's the Bellway site that's currently being developed. You can see some bits in the background there. So that's the 250 house site. And then this is the access to the allotments. So this is just outside the site, but it has been looked at in terms of what the requirements are going to be, because the new road will have to widen into this access, so a new access is going to need to be provided, which is subject to separate discussions between the Highway Authority and TDC as the landowner of that access. And this plan is just showing in purple the areas that are to be adopted by the highway as part of this junction joining in. So looking at the south of the site and where the new Nash Road alignment will join in with the existing alignment of Nash Road, this is, so to the left-hand side you can see the edge of the Westwood Cross housing site. I think most of you will probably know, if you've driven along Nash Road, the section of road which is particularly wide if you're going to Margate. Before then it immediately narrows down, you have to turn a very sharp right-hand turn. Well, the principle behind this allocation and the requirements of it are that Nash Road would effectively continue on, so it would no longer divert along the yellow that you can see there. It would effectively newly align and run straight forward. There is one of the bridleways that you can kind of see along here that would cross the new alignment, and it's proposed for a Pegasus crossing at that point, which is the crossing that allows for a width that includes pedestrians and also horses. So this is just showing the footpaths again. So you've got two bridleways specifically, both of which at the moment which sort of terminate at the existing alignment of Nash Road, but will now cross the new alignment of Nash Road. So at both points where there's a bridleway, there will be a Pegasus crossing to ensure that there is crossing there. Within the site as well, where there is a bridleway on there, that's going to be part of the landscaping scheme, so that will come forward within the landscaping conditions. So looking at the rest of Nash Road, so we were just looking in this corner here on the left-hand side, and you can see the development under construction from the satellite image here. So Nash Road, as again most people will know anecdotally, you've got the widened section up to the junction, which is newly going into what's called Lunar Road. You've got Westwood Industrial Estate here, and then you've got Nash Farm here. So taking the left-hand side first, originally what was proposed through the application was that there was an issue due to land ownership with the housing site next to the site, and what was being proposed by the applicant was a shuttle working junction. So it was a signalised junction, which would basically mean that you had one lane open at one point to work on the highway network at this point. The applicants worked with KCC and ourselves to change the scheme because that didn't align with what the Thanet transport strategy was looking for, and through amendments to the proposal and securing additional land, the full widening all the way along that stretch of Nash Road has now been proposed, which includes to local distributor standard. It does drop down at one point to just the sort of high 6.6 metres, but predominantly it's 7.3 metres wide, with a 3 metre footway on one side of it for most of the route, when then it goes on to the other side as well. So just to look at those sections specifically then on the left-hand side, looking at where you've got an access here, which I should have this image here. So where just to the right of where it says Bovis Homes, you've got an access which actually serves 2 dwellings here. So pretty much from that point onwards, you have a widening that occurs on this stretch of Nash Road. So you can see again the existing highways in yellow, and the red dotted line shows the full extent of the highway. Basically that's the edge of the footway. You've got 3 metres then of footway cycleway, before then you get at the minimum width here is 6.6 metres. One point that has come up as a request relates to this area here. So again, anecdotally, members will know that there was a very significant fire on the Westwood Industrial Estate, which is this cleared site here to the right of where it says Alexandra Garage. As part of an application subsequently submitted, there was a proposal which was approved for 59 units, industrial units on that particular site. Within that, there was provision made to require a pedestrian link to be provided through that site, with the knowledge that there were improvement works required by policy to get Nash Road upgraded. So there is a condition which requires further details of a crossing point to be provided on Nash Road in the event that this application comes forward. It has still got some time to implement, and assuming that that does come forward prior to the submission of the details of the actual reserve matters that relate to Nash Road, that then we would effectively be able to secure a new crossing point here so that the pedestrian links will tie up, which is obviously one of the aims. So just moving down along Nash Road, Nash Farm is the other constraint to the widening along this stretch. So specifically, as Annabelle has mentioned, to be able to widen Nash Road and get the required improvements, there are 2 structures which need to be demolished to get the requirements. So this is proposing the demolition of these structures. They are considered to be non-designated heritage assets due to their age. However, as Annabelle has mentioned, the Conservation Officer has looked at this, and also the archaeology, KCC on their heritage side, and it is considered that the buildings have been remodelled a number of times. Obviously, you can see actually, so this is a street view image from 2022, and obviously one of them doesn't, obviously you can see have a roof. There is a condition requiring building recording and details of exactly the full extent of demolition to come in as a condition. It is considered that you can't get the widening of Nash Road without losing these buildings, and therefore it is a case of whether or not the public benefits of doing that outweigh the harm from the loss of those buildings, which we do consider the benefits to outweigh. And then the last section for Nash Road specifically, just looking at where you've got Wherry Close, which is to the north here, and then you've got Orion Way south. So you've got this stretch here. So there's Nash Farm again. You have a new crossing point at this area here. So this is a Toucan crossing, so traffic lighted crossing point, where you go from one side of the road to be able to go onto the other side of the road with a new footway, which is on the existing alignment on that area of yellow that you can see running down here for 3 metres, which will then join in with where you can see at the very bottom of your the photo here, you can see a little tiny bit of pavement here, which would then be obviously go basically and run all the way up Nash Road, where it will be obviously widened. So that is the full extent of the changes that are being proposed on Nash Road. So a key point in terms of the requirements of this scheme are that those works, the full extent of those works, have to be completed before any dwelling occupied from the new Nash Road is occupied. So any dwelling that comes off this new road can't be occupied until all of those roadworks have been completed. So specifically looking at the part of the development that will be accessed from Manston Court Road, this is an aerial image showing Manston Court Road and this part of the site. To show you some street view images, some images from the street. You can see the neighbouring property to the site on Manston Court Road. Turning to the right, you've then got the power lines I mentioned earlier, which will need to be cabled underneath. You've then got the Bovis Homes, Vistry Homes, Persimmon, Linden development that's obviously taken a significant number of years to come forward in the background. And then turning again to your right, you can see Red House Farm, which has previously had consent for housing, and the rest of Manston Court Road. So one access point is proposed here. The 2026 scenario that I mentioned earlier for the transport assessment specifically looked at what happens when you put 300 dwellings that can access off Manston Court Road, what happens to the network, where does it fall down, etc. So looking at that specifically, what's been proposed in terms of that is that there is a hard limit on the number of dwellings that you can access from a junction on Manston Court Road, and that is up to 300. So there is a condition which would require any reserve matters can't show more dwellings being occupied by that are accessed from Manston Court Road. There is a proposal for a bus gate to be provided, so there are public transport links potentially through the site, and we'll talk a bit about the potential for bus transportation from this site in a bit. But what's being proposed in detail is a new junction onto Manston Court Road. Through KCC's requirements, that is a left out only junction. The idea behind it is it directs traffic down to the newly enlarged roundabout at Westwood Cross, and I'll show you how this connects into the Westwood Village site to the south. You have got a new right-hand turn lane that's being put in for vehicles that are travelling in that way and to be able to turn into the site as well. And then you've got pedestrian refuge islands to cross over from the 3-metre footway that's to be provided on that road, because you have an existing, effectively it is about 3 metres wide footway along the south side of Manston Court Road at the moment. So the wider context is that to the north or top of the image, you've got the Manston Court Road bit, so hopefully you can see my mouse circling where that new access is going to be. This is a partial overview of the Westwood Village development. So it's got planning permission for 900 houses, and this is part of the Manston to Hayne link, which starts at the northern part of Hayne Road. So Manston Court Road connects into the end of Star Lane, which then routes round to, in the top of the image, you can see the newly enlarged roundabout, which is proposed and has been already consented through the Westwood Village scheme to enlarge the roundabout on the edge of Marks and Spencer's to provide more capacity there. You then have a newly enlarged roundabout at the Toby Carvery, again, already consented through the Westwood Village scheme for 900 houses. And then you have a new spine road through this site, which then routes down as part of the KCC strategy to go down towards effectively Manston to provide an alternative route rather than the Hayne Road corridor. Now, specifically, in terms of looking at the capacity of the wider network and how it accommodates the amount of dwellings, as part of the strategic assessment of the site by KCC, it has been considered that they are satisfied that there is no requirement for off-site junction improvements individually, on the basis that there needs to be a contribution towards the specific Manston to Hayne link. So that link, in terms of what is not being provided on development sites, effectively is shown in the local plan via running along part of Manston Court Road, down Preston Road, and then you can see this is the airport, this is the Northern Grass area here, and down to Spitfire Junction. Now, originally when the transport strategy came in, it had actually a route going straight through the Northern Grass. Members will be very familiar with the fact that we've had the development consent order subsequent to that and the NSIP for the airport, and that has looked at then alternatives in terms of how a new route can be provided to the north of the Northern Grass across the area to basically link into Manston Road higher up. But then with the requirement needed to deal with Spitfire Junction, because as everyone knows, it is currently over capacity. Now, as part of the work that went into the Manston to Hayne link, there was an understanding that there was a notional cost that didn't include the Spitfire Junction of £16 million that it would cost for basically everything outside of the Westwood Village site up to Spitfire Junction in terms of the improvements that would be needed in the new routing. Now, in about 2 years ago, there was an apportionment exercise that was done, which looked at the amount of that money, how that money would be split between this site as an allocated site and the Westwood Village allocation. So I mentioned about 900 houses being consented on that site. The other part of that site is basically for 500 houses to the west of that. So overall, it's 1,400 across that site, of which is basically to take up the rest of the contribution towards this 16 million. Now, the proportion of that from this site was worked out as 47%. That was about 7.5 million. So subsequent to that apportionment, working with the applicant, that has been updated to account for indexation and the fact that costs have gone up in the last 2 years. So that contribution now stands at 7.9 million. I'm not going to give you all the detailed pounds. It is in the report. And what's been agreed and put forward by the applicant is that money will be paid in its entirety before the occupation of the 800th dwelling on the site. Now, the detailed trigger points before that and how that money will come forward, whether it's 3 payments, 2 payments, etc., are subject to a negotiation as part of the Section 106 with KCC Highways. And that partially comes out of the fact that KCC Highways are doing work at the moment, looking at the routes, working out what needs to potentially change in terms of the routes and the logistics of providing the improvements. Now, it does outline in the report how it is expected that the costs are potentially going to increase in terms of that 16 million when looking at the routes, and any shortfall of that amount would have to be found through contributions. Now, the policy SP47 allows for any development that impacts on the strategic routes to potentially provide a contribution to the improvement works to that. So, for example, Spitfire Junction has a contribution from the Minster housing site towards it. There's a contribution from the Manston Business Park development that also goes to improvements at Spitfire Junction. And also the airport in itself has required works at the Spitfire Junction that need to be done as part of their DCO when that comes forward. There is a proposal and a clause that's put in the heads of terms which would allow for the costs to be looked at in terms of the contribution specifically towards this Manston to Hayne link, but that would be a reapportionment of all of the KCC contributions specifically, so it wouldn't take away from and threaten the viability of the scheme. Specifically, it would not touch the 30% affordable housing. So that pretty much covers highways. I've definitely gone over the time that I'd proposed to talk about this, so apologies, members. I'm now going to very quickly, I promise, go through phasing and heads of terms. So, as mentioned, the site provides 30% affordable housing. That's been put forward on a notional mixed basis of 70% affordable rent or social rent, depending on what comes out of the affordable housing scheme, 25% of which would be first homes, 5% of which would be shared ownership. There will be some flexibility in that. However, obviously, as we've talked many times, affordable rent is the most needed. That 70% is not going to be threatened and is not going to be reduced, but obviously it does allow some flexibility in the first home amount depending on what occurs with regards to first home provisions in the district. 100% nomination rights for the affordable rent would be held by the council, with the precise distribution locations obviously to be agreed as reserve matters come forward. So in the report that you've got, it outlines a significant number of contributions that are being proposed. I don't, for the sake of time, propose to go through all of them. Suffice to say, though, that all of the requests that are made by KCC with regards to education, including the provision of the service land for the primary school is being provided with contributions towards primary, secondary, as well as community learning, adult social care, special educational needs, as well as waste recycling, specialist care provision, and libraries as well. Sports contribution is something I do want to just pause on a little bit, because there are contributions that are being made. Annabelle's already mentioned about the upgrade of the build of the hall in the primary school to allow for badminton court provision with a particular condition which requires a community use agreement. There are contributions of around 800,000 towards Hartsdown Leisure Centre for swimming pool provision and enhancements to that provision. There is also about 578,000 towards Jackie Baker's and the project that's enshrined by policy for improvements to facilities there, as well as a contribution towards Cliftonville Bowls as the only indoor bowl centre that we have in the district. There are obligations towards healthcare, specifically required 1.2 million for healthcare facilities and provision in the area, and you also have the SAMS contribution, and there is a couple of other clauses that's worth mentioning. One is that a minimum of 1% of the total units will be required to be self-build or custom build, and that's to accord with the specific requirements of the plan. And then there is also a clause, come back to that plan for phasing, which looks at the local centre specifically. So that is to actually require a clause to basically make sure that there is provision to try and make sure that the local centre basically gets delivered, because we want to ensure that there's an agreement of a scheme, a marketing strategy that the council would have input into, to seek expressions of interest in terms of implementation and transfer to operators with agreed trigger points as well. The principle behind it is to ensure that there is provision made on this site for convenience retail. The EIA has been worked out on the basis of, I think, 1,200 square metres of convenience retail, potential for cafe, some non-retail floor space, about 100 square metres, and also a nursery. So there is a potential, there's certainly enough space to provide a local centre there, the detail of which, though, will have to obviously come through the reserve matters. Okay, so in terms of phasing, the main point which links to the highway infrastructure requirements are that the very first phase that's been notionally put forward is phase 1A, which is to the south of the site. So it's part of that development off Manston Court Road. It's worth noting it's not the full 300 dwellings notionally, but obviously this is a phasing plan that's been showed illustratively. There is a condition that's been put on which would require a phasing plan to come in again at the same point of the first reserve matters. The idea would be that the north and south parts of the site are developed first, but as mentioned, obviously no dwelling within the blue area to the north, the purple area, the red area, the orange area. No dwellings could be occupied until the full extent of Nash Road and the improvements and widening have taken place. Okay, so in conclusion, I mentioned 2 points of departure from the strategic allocation, and we have considered whether or not the additional 11 dwellings and the change in the red line would result in significant harm to warrant refusal of the application. It is considered on both points, given the identified need for housing in the district, that significant weight should be put on the proposed housing on this allocated site, as well as the 30% affordable housing and financial contributions. Highways infrastructure has been a source of much discussion, and that's the reason why it's taken 2 years to get this application to members. But we now have no objections from the Highway Authority, subject to agreeing the triggers for the contribution to be made to the Manston to Hayne link. And that will provide tangible benefits and network resilience by upgrading Nash Road, which wouldn't come forward in any other instance without this site being developed. We have considered that there is less than substantial harm to the setting of heritage assets. However, that is considered to be outweighed, and we do consider that the strategy for developing the site and all the landscape strategy, the ecology strategy, the strategy with regards to archaeology does accommodate the extent of development in the areas where you can develop the site whilst providing a suitable mitigation package which will be safeguarded through conditions. And therefore the application is recommended to defer to officers for approval for us to get the legal agreement with all these heads of terms secured. We do have a draft of that legal agreement already, but we are obviously going to then proceed, if it was delegated to us for approval, with securing those heads of terms as outlined in the report, subject also to the conditions that are outlined in Annex 1 and also the adoption of the HRA at Annex 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I go on to the next part, I'm going to suggest that we take a short break. I would normally do this in about 10 or 15 minutes' time, but members, we have been patiently listening. It has been an hour and a half, and I think I'm watching as everyone around, and I think a few minutes to just stretch our legs would probably do us all some good. So if we could return in 5 minutes. I do have 2 speakers already on my list waiting to speak, and I have got you both. Thank you. Okay, welcome back everyone. The next bit is I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
And the first person I have for speaking is Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for the very detailed presentation. There are a huge number of issues to consider on this application, and I'm sure members will want to address them in detail. But to summarise, this site is allocated in the local plan. 30% affordable housing is being proposed. The biodiversity net gain would be considerable, 18%. There are substantial highways improvements. In my view, it's a very well planned development in terms of the varied density on the site, the height of the buildings, the character areas, the green infrastructure, and the play areas. Changes have necessitated the redefining of the application site, and this has been clearly explained this evening. Personally, I would find it difficult to identify cogent planning reasons not to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alban.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, like the rest of the members, you know, I'm drowning in information. But basically, Councillor Bayford is absolutely right. There are issues here. I must admit, I was reading the report, and some of my things I put down here was obviously loss of farmland, you know, effects on vehicle movements. The main thing that worries me a little bit is the NHS Kent and Medway state that the development will have a direct impact which will require mitigation. Now I know there's money put forward, quite substantial, but we don't know where it's going, how it's going to be spent. Will it be spent in this area? Will it be spent in other areas of Thanet? I don't know, because we haven't got that information. But that does concern me, like it concerns everybody. We haven't got enough doctors. The hospital is more than rammed. You know, A&E, we're talking 24 hours. Now, we're out of this, not just this development, but across all of the developments along Westwood, the amount of vehicles, the amount of people who are going to live on the sites, it's quite substantial for our area, and it's going to be a massive impact, not just on the people who're moving in it, or who would want to move into these places, but on the whole of the area. I think obviously as well the effect on the wildlife, as we all know, you know, certainly where I live opposite Park, and I was saying this morning, I've seen one bird all day, and I just think, you know, we are losing those things. However, and there's always a however, and my however is, one, we need the housing. Two, this has been in the local plan with the council approved it. The planning inspector, or whatever they're called, is approved it. The government's approved it, and this is there, fully approved. And as this is where I come back to what Councillor Bayford has said. Fully support what she said in relation to this site, the layout, and everything else in it. And I'm extremely pleased to see the Nash Road changes, which are really, really needed. I go up there quite often, and I'm very, very pleased to see that. So I'm as well finding it difficult to come up, as Councillor Bayford said, with a cogent reason that I could actually come forward with to say we should refuse this application on one or two specific points. So I will leave it there, and thank you, Chair. Oh, no, I think there was one other thing. Oh, in a memento. Yes, Chair. In relation to the extra 11 houses, in the great round of thing, it makes no difference whatsoever. Whether these were in the original application or not, an extra 11 houses is going to make no difference to anybody in relation to this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on the healthcare point just specifically. So the request from the NHS Integrated Care Board works on the basis of a contribution per dwelling, and in part it's because this site lies within the sort of the boundaries of various different practices at the moment, and which is why it hasn't been earmarked for one specific practice, that money specifically, but it has to be effectively go towards one of the practices that serve the residents of this development. Otherwise, we can't secure the contribution because it wouldn't mitigate the impact of the development. We have obviously talked about the separate staffing issue with regards to GP surgeries, and obviously, ultimately, all that the CCG can do in this instance for the planning side of things is get the money in to mitigate the impact, and it's about how they deploy that and how that works with a wider strategy about primary care in the area. So again, in terms of this application and mitigating its impact, it does that, but I know members' concerns on that, as we've talked about it a number of times. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Matterface.
Well, predictably, I'm going to refer to the bus strategy, because Ian didn't. A bit of conflict here, because one part of the report says that Stagecoach has expressed they're not interested. Stagecoach has no plans for serving the site, but £960,000 is going for a shuttle bus service between Westwood and the development. But the bus strategy says liaison with County Council Public Transport and Stagecoach is also recommended at the earliest opportunity. The County Council notes the shuttle route between Westwood and Margate via the site is proposed to be the most viable option, any new service, and a consensus would need to be reached between the relevant stakeholders prior to any determination of its application. So if Stagecoach in one part of the report says we haven't any plans, and nobody can force them to, but there's going to be a shuttle bus service, I think it said for 3 years. Can you clarify if this is something that would come back later? Because it does say a consensus would need to be reached, and I'm assuming there isn't a consensus as yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and apologies for missing this point about the public transport link on this point. So initially, the comment that's being made with regards to there not being any plans from Stagecoach to do with a bus thing is effectively without this development. Without this development, there isn't any plan or wasn't any plan to connect up and provide an alternative route to obviously the route that is part of the loop that goes obviously along the Ramsgate Road. Ultimately, what's been proposed through KCC Highways, and obviously the work that they've got in terms of the public transport team, is to effectively to work with Stagecoach to try and provide a shuttle bus, which would basically link to the interchange that's at Westward Cross, which is obviously the interchange that then links to everything else. And that's why there is the contribution which is put forward, which is the sort of pump priming contribution for the 3 years worth of operation for a service to come forward. Now, ultimately, as with the Birchington site, it has to work on a business sense after that 3 years, and it does require work from KCC Highways and Stagecoach through things like the Quality Bus Partnership and those sort of other sort of forums to plan for this development as it builds out. I think one thing I would say just logistically is that there is more potential for this to benefit from the fact that you have got on the outer edge of the site at the Westwood Cross, so the other housing site, if I'll circle it there, yes, it's within walking distance of Westwood Cross, but obviously if you've got a bus interchange, shuttle bus that then links to the stuff at Westwood Cross, there is some potential other uptake. And then obviously you have got those other developments that we talked about to the north, obviously Salmston Grange 250 houses, the Shondane Road scheme, which is 450 houses. So there's more of an argument that there's a corridor or development that could sustain something, but ultimately for it to work, it does need Stagecoach to do it. The developer is proposing to, is providing the money for KCC to make it work.
Quickly, the next paragraph says methodology of every dwelling to be located within 400 metres of a bus service. It also says in the report, from this development, it's 2 kilometres to the loop on the Margate Road, which is quite a hike, and it's 750 metres to Westwood Cross. So it's not quite clear if that measurement is from the edge of the development going that way or the centre, or is it just a fairly random kind of obviously it just says 2 kilometres to, and then 750 metres, but it's not clear at which point of the development they're measuring. Any idea?
I wrote that section and I measured it, but it was in a slight haze of report writing, but let me just get the section up here in 1 second. So the 2 kilometres, so just to check, you're in the public transport section of the report here. So yeah, the 2 kilometres is related to the railway station specifically. And it's a 10-minute, now there's a word missing, which is a 10-minute walk of bus stops on Ramsgate Road. So that is looking at, basically I tried to ensure that we were looking at the fullest extent of the site. Now I don't have the diagram that is in the documentation that's been provided as part of the travel plan, the travel plan that's put forward, which indicates basically circles around different areas of the site to show where the bus stops were. Ultimately, it is a sustainably located site, and it does have footpath links in and out, and we do think the bus, there is a potential for a bus shuttle to work there. It's also, in terms of the links to the rest of the network, the cycle link is also quite a key point in this site, and how it then links through both the Westwood Village development and also obviously going along Nash Road with the 3 metres. So it's an overall package, I would say.
Thank you. The next person I have on my list is Councillor Bright.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the reports. I think Councillors Bayford and Alban have said most of what I was going to bring up, but I have 3 questions really. The first is around the SUDs that are on the that map. I mean, how do we? I'll just give you my questions first, and then you can just come back. So the first is, do you have any kind of impression of what they'll actually look like in reality, in the kind of lived environment? My second question and third question aren't maybe not specifically related to what's in the report, but the second one is around the Hayne Road link. Can you just look at that again, or talk us through that again? I'm rubbish at roads, at knowing where I am. I know my way around, but I just don't know what the roads are called. I think the concern that most people have is the volume of traffic when you're coming in and out through Westwood Cross. So if you can just talk us through that. You showed a slide there that sort of showed, because I just want to get it into my head where that is. And the third one is really about secondary education. We've talked a lot about primary. We talked a lot in the Birchington meetings around their new primary school that they're having. So obviously a new primary school is part of this. Those children have to go somewhere. Are we looking at a new secondary school somewhere? Where would that be? And how is that going to work? So they're my questions. I'm not fully, obviously not fully decided. I'm just going to wait on. I'm interested in what other members have to say for the rest of it.
Thanks. So in terms of the SUDs, what's been shown on the plans in the open space parameter plans links to the drainage statement that came in that was looked at by KCC. That looked at the provision of, in terms of the blue areas here, infiltration basins. So that would effectively look like a large pond in some instances. There's a larger one that's on the right-hand side of the image that you can see, which is sort of within the area where you've also got a sort of play area to the north of that, a little bit there. In terms of what that looks like, it is a case that the detail will be looked at as part of the reserve matters and also as part of the landscaping strategy. You know, if you've got something that's particularly deep, you obviously need to put certain provisions of railings and things around it. But ultimately, these are they will be dictated by virtue of the infiltration rate that you have in different areas of the site to ensure that there isn't runoff that then goes off-site. The runoff rate and the infiltration rate that's already been looked at does accord with what KCC would need, but they do require additional testing to ensure, with further, as I mentioned earlier, further groundwater monitoring to ensure that infiltration would be sufficient. So the detail of what it looks like on the ground, and again, this is an illustrative plan, would be something that would be coming forward in the future. In terms of Hayne Road and the strategic routes policy and the about 8 million to be provided, I will go to, I'll start with this plan. Westwood Cross, as I mentioned earlier, there's the Toby Carvery on the corner of a roundabout at the moment. That roundabout will be made larger. So where Toby Carvery is and the cinema sort of complex, I'm going to refer to it as the cinema, that roundabout you can kind of see just here, but that's being enlarged. That's being enlarged as part of the 900 house, which is both the white area and the green area here. This is obviously the Westwood Village site. You've got a new road that comes off the Toby Carvery roundabout, if we can call it that, that goes and runs to the west. So that goes through this site, so avoiding what's currently used as a cut through to avoid the Hayne Road corridor, which is Manston Court Road. So this spine road will come through this site. It serves these 900 dwellings. It then, so that runs from this point here, if you can see the mouse pointer, runs along here. So this is, this was the sort of notional route as part of the local plan. There is then another allocation here, which is for 500 houses next to the 900 for Westwood Village. That is where there is proposed to be a new secondary school, a sixth form entry secondary school, which is part of the allocation, which requires the provision of that. We have that application in, and that will be reported to members in due course. Before then, effectively, the provisional route that was put forward as a strategic route in the local plan ran down Manston Court Road and then cut down the road that's here. I believe it's Preston Road off the top of my head. And then this originally showed it along Manston Court Road. Along Manston Road, but it's the west to east Manston Road. Now, what I was mentioning in the discussion was this has changed, and this has changed primarily as a result of changes that have occurred to the airport with the DCO. And so what's now being looked at by KCC is that the road would be provided as per through Westwood Village. It would then come through the northern part of the airport site where there is land that's been safeguarded for a part of the road through the NSIP, and then further improvements would be made to Manston Road, running down past the museum to then the Spitfire Junction, where the current thinking from KCC would be a roundabout at Spitfire Junction. Now, from Spitfire Junction up to where the Westwood Village site ends, that's what was notionally put forward, I keep using the word notionally, £16 million a few years ago, but that's what KCC are looking at specifically now in terms of how does that route work. You've got, a sort of Southern Water facility there. How does it accommodate that? You've got the road network around there. You've got obviously various properties around there. Does land need to be CPO'd to provide the different links? And so that's being worked up as part of their ongoing transport strategy. This ultimately the contribution that's being made will give flexibility for that money to be used to improve that link. Obviously, the actual housing development at Westwood Village will bring forward the vast majority of the start of that link, but it's just about how you improve the roads around the north of the airport to make it a viable route to get out of the district at the moment. Now, again, anecdotally, I think most people know that people do travel along Manston Court Road and cut through when Hayne Road is busy. This is acknowledging that reality, and the Transport Strategy is trying to deal with it through all the strategic allocations all the way around, providing the overall inner circuit to avoid the Canterbury Road to the north and the congestion that comes from that, and also the Hayne Road corridor along from this site. I covered it when talking about Westwood Village. Yes, secondary education, that's where there's two contributions. One is for the land itself, and the other is actually for the provision and build of the school. So pretty much every single development over 10 units is providing a contribution towards secondary education, because it is acknowledged that, yeah, we've got all these primary schools, and birth rate wise there is a reduction, but within every KCC commissioning plan, it is always predicted that there will need to be a secondary school at some point, and the location that was decided through the local plan was at Westwood to accommodate this site, all the other sites around there. So that is part of the application that we have in for 500 houses to the west of the 900 houses in Westwood Village, which will be coming before members in due course.
Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. I've got one comment and two questions, so I'll give them all to you in one go as well. My comment was just about the, and I know, you know, these aren't sort of settled plans yet, but it said about the buildings not having front gardens, and I mean there's lots of lovely green space in this development, but I always worry when houses don't have front gardens, because the planting on those roadways is often very poor quality and not well looked after, and I just think that's a shame. But I say that's just a comment. My questions are, how near is the building going to be to the cemetery in an actual distance rather than just on the drawings, because I find it hard to imagine that. And I'm asking that in particular because this building is going to go on for 15 years, and it's not just about the noise to people in the cemetery. It's actually people going to the crematorium, the services there, and the disruption that could cause. I know there's already been some problems with the other building going on around that area in terms both of dust and noise. So I know there will be mitigations put in place, but I worry, especially over such a long period of time, how that might affect the cemetery and crematorium. And my second question is the air quality, and that's taking into account all the developments that are going on around this area. Is calculations done taking into account all the developments of the likely impact on air quality from what's going to be lots more traffic? Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the distance from the, I'll just get the other plan up actually, sorry, bear with me. Distance from the cemetery. It is difficult to say precisely because ultimately the precise distance will be fixed, in the reserve matters, which looks at the particular phase of development. But if I can sort of show you this, which is again the illustrative plan, you have the, actually put it on the slideshow. You have the area of the cement works, the allotments, and then you have half-mile ride that runs along the edge of the cemetery and the crematorium here. So you can see generally the illustrative plan shows effectively sort of it's more than 15 metres from the edge of the site. I think what's important here is that that's phase particularly, we will look at that distance and see how it can be managed and mitigated. There are proposals to have planting in that area as well. In terms of the impact on the cemetery, and this is something specifically that for the Salmston Grange development that you've referenced, the Bellway development, that was built in to the construction management plan, which required us to remind them of their responsibilities when it comes to the disturbance of the cemetery. There is a condition, which is condition 22, which requires a lot of detail about a construction management plan and what's needed. As well, the impact on the cemetery will obviously be concentrated when that phase is being developed. Now, obviously, as you mentioned, it's a 15-year development cycle. One of the first phases is the area to the right-hand side of the image that you can see, sort of potentially, but that might be subject to change. That's obviously sort of going to be the closest for a bit, but provision is going to have to be made through the construction management plan to again manage it as best as possible during construction. It may be about it, depending on when there is more heavy-duty work that will be the noisier work, that would need to be obviously looked at, but there is provision within the conditions to do it. It is unfortunate that there will be some disturbance, but it's about the importance of managing it, and as we found with the Salmston Grange one, it ultimately is about enforcing it, because that's what we've had to do with that scheme. In terms of air quality, there is submissions that have been made with regards to air quality as part of the EIA, which have been looked at by environmental health. So because the district is no longer in the full-on AQMA as a management area, but we still look at the scale of the development and ensuring that there are emissions mitigations that are made. As part of that, there is a costing that's created using the environmental health guidance that basically says, here's the sort of damage cost, and you have to basically provide and show how you've spent that money within the development providing improvements to air quality through additional landscaping, etc. And that is separate from the requirement for electric vehicle charging points, which is now obviously required through building regs. And there is a condition which requires details to be provided for each individual phase when that comes into the reserve matters about how that money's been spent. It may be that it's just provided, one hit in one particular area. I think it's about 200,000 off the top of my head. Yeah, it's in the report, but it's condition 45, which refers back to the EIA. So, yes, they have looked at the air quality impact from this number of houses as part of the EIA, which has been looked at by the senior practitioner who deals with air quality in the environmental health team. And it does accord with our specific guidance on air quality.
Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Just following up on what Councillor King said about the front gardens, it is a shame. I echo that there aren't more front gardens. The proper front gardens. I mean, when you talked about the density of the site, I was thinking it might be nice to maybe expand a little bit the built-on sites, just reducing a bit the open spaces, just to enable there to be some proper front gardens built on each of the, maybe if each of the plots were a little bit bigger, that would certainly enhance the biodiversity of the whole site. And I also recognise what she said about the trees, and certainly on the Star Lane development, where shoddy would be a compliment as to the way they've been planted and then looked after over the last 6 or 7 years. It's really disappointing when I go up to Marks and Spencer's and turn on into the car park there, or walk into the car park if I'm not in my car, and see the array of dead trees that are still there. And I realise now it's been over 5 years, so any enforcement cases can't be followed up anymore. But that I wasn't going to say any of that. But anyway, that's the first thing. There's a couple of things in the report that seem a little bit out of date from when I read it to what we've heard tonight. I mean, one of the concerns I had that was in the report was that the strategic housing team had said they could not recommend approving this application because there was no commitment to 30% affordable housing. So that is obviously a concern for us. And then I heard from the applicant that there is now a commitment to 30%. Is that a commitment that is going to be in writing, that there is going to be 30% affordable housing? Maybe if you can answer that, and then I'll carry on.
Yes, so it's because the very first submission didn't talk about the heads of terms. So they've provided their comment on the basis that it didn't confirm it. It has been confirmed. That's why it's in the bullet points of the heads of terms. That is ultimately what it needs to be then in the legal agreement, and it is a commitment for 30%. Yeah. Oh, can I quickly do front gardens? Sorry, because I forgot to do it. Just as a point here that it's one of the character areas that indicated that is a potential for part of the site, I think, and it's not even that it's that character area has it entirely. Yeah. It will clearly vary, and I think, but I understand your point about, well, you know, could you expand it and reduce the density? There is a condition which requires a design guide to be provided, which basically would build out from the character areas themselves. So there might be pockets where you would have areas where there wouldn't be, for example, front gardens. But, you know, I understand what members are saying, and I think I'd agree with the importance of it. It will just depend on the very detailed stuff that comes through the reserve matters about what we can secure.
I'm glad you mentioned, actually that's reminding me, I'm glad you mentioned the character areas, because some of those pictures that you showed of the character areas were very interesting. They looked like a number of trees there that were about 40 years old. So I don't think any of us are ever going to see, if they were, if you're lucky. If that's, I mean, it's amusing, but I do find it it can be quite misleading to show us these beautiful pictures of parks areas with children playing in parks with massive trees on either side, these lovely green areas everywhere, and it would certainly stand out like a sore thumb next to the Star Lane estate, because I can't see that being like that in 30 years, but so it is. One of the other things I wanted to ask about, which may be different in the report to what you've said, is under the highways section, there were a couple of areas where they had concerns about. One was around an access point. A central portion of the site still only one vehicle access point to the wider network adjacent to the school. And I think they were saying was a holding objection or something, holding something anyway, until that was sorted out. And the others was relating to the Thanet transport strategy and bus service, making sure that these Section 106 contributions to those are agreed in full with relevant triggers. So they obviously had, or it seems they hadn't been when that was when the report was written. Are they now? Because I think with the size of this site, and I think as Councillor Matterface sort of touched upon, with the size of this site and the myriad of other sites, we're talking about, when it's all done, a massive estate of thousands of houses with very little access to public transport apart from a few shuttle buses that may be taking people onto another bus site. We shouldn't really, it might not be a matter for us here, but we shouldn't really be developing large sites of thousands of houses where it's very difficult for people to get onto a bus or any public transport. It just doesn't work. And when you look at the Hayne Road as it is at the moment, we all know, whether we like it or not, we all know it's a nightmare up there, getting in and out of Thanet. When this is all finished, it will be it will still be a nightmare. It's going to be a nightmare. That's how it is. And it's interesting that the Manston Court Road is looking at being expanded. It'll need to be. I think, did you say it was actually a new road rather than the Manston Court Road being widened? Because certainly the Manston Court Road as it is at the moment, it is quite good to use as a bit of to bypass the Hayne Road sometimes, as long as it hasn't been raining. Because I know the last time I used it, we were going to the Spitfire Museum, it had been raining, there were massive queues of traffic to get through the flood that builds up there. So the other concern I've got about this is there are a lot of things that need to be done before either any house building can be started or any houses can be occupied. You sort of touched on the southern water issues, in that there's an upgrade, I assume quite a big upgrade required before, I think you said, any houses can be started to be built, because obviously it need to be around there, but they can't be occupied. This is a larger version of the one over in Manston that I remember, where the houses were built but nobody could move in because Southern Water hadn't. I think that has been done now, but it hadn't been done. And the other thing, which is a positive, that we're not going to be able to have anyone living there until these roads have been completed. But there is a lot needs doing before anyone can actually live there. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a really bad thing, but it just sort of points to me to how this and the other sites up there aren't exactly the most sustainable places to be building. Putting aside this is allocated in the local plan. We've been through all that, and this is, hindsight's a wonderful thing. We are where we are, but it does seem to indicate that that it isn't maybe the best place for this to be being done. And one last thing, which also might link into the report not being quite up to date. Sports England weren't very happy in the report anyway, because there's no sports provision, they're saying, which I'm assuming means for development of this site, and if you add it onto all the other developments up there, where there's going to be many thousands of people living, there aren't any sports fields, is what I think they're suggesting. Is that still the case, or are we saying it's acceptable that they just make some contributions and we update the leisure centre in Margate and the indoor bowls clubs in Cliftonville, and then the people who live there can get their shuttle buses to a nearest bus route, so they can then go over to Cliftonville to do some indoor bowling? Thank you.
Okay, to pick up the highways point first, so the final comment that we've received is the one in the transport consultees. It's on page 7 of the report. So to pick up the first point, which related to the actual sort of access within the site. That, I'll just show you, was an original concern about basically what's happening inside on the new alignment of Nash Road, where you've got this access point here. Again, this is an illustrative plan as part of the submission, which is a sort of secondary spine road, which then accesses a lot of the development in and around the orange, red, and sort of purple areas. So there is a condition which requires that road to be a particular standard. It's got to be to adoptable standard, which is obviously quite important, with obviously a lot of the issues that come up when these roads are not built to that standard. KCC's sort of final comment is obviously that they don't have any objections, subject to all of the conditions, which obviously includes the condition with regards to that road and access. In terms of the quote that you mentioned about the Thanet contribution towards the Thanet transport strategy and bus services, so specifically in terms of that section sort of stating that it's considered to be a holding objection until the full contribution and triggers have been agreed. The obviously full contribution has been agreed, That's what obviously is now in the heads of terms. And obviously it then says subsequently, I confirm that provided the terms of the 106 are agreeable, so the trigger points, which is part of the next bit of the negotiation, and then the following requirements are secured by condition, I raise no objection. So it is a case that there still needs to be discussion about exactly when the payment of the £8 million occurs. But as mentioned, the top point of it in terms of capacity is that all of that money will be paid for the occupation of the 800th dwelling across the site. So you're looking at, it's a bit more than 50%, but that's basically all of the money is going to be paid by then. But the reality is, at the moment, we are still waiting to hear from KCC about how they might wish to split up that 8 million to do the different bits of work along that Manston to Hayne Road link, and the flexibility that it's given to discuss that as part of the 106 and the triggers. Ultimately, overall, KCC's view is that the contribution deals with the impact, because ultimately the way you deal with all these big sites is the strategic solution of the inner circuit. In terms of the other update to the report, which I'll touch on, which is the Sport England point. So again, it's the same as the strategic housing team in some instance, that as part of what Sport England were consulted on, it didn't contain information to confirm what the heads of terms were and where the contributions are. We've used the Sport England calculator specifically to work out what that amount of money is and where it goes towards the different requirements that's in our sports strategy as part of the local plan. So that's why there's the almost 600,000 towards Jackie Baker's, because Jackie Baker's, as recognised by the policy in the local plan, is the area where the sports pitches are supposed to be in that area. And obviously one of the key things that this site does, as the Westwood Village site does, is there is a link to be provided as part of that site off Manston Court Road, you can see the top, which then runs all the way through the Westwood Village site. You can see the route here through the Westwood Village site, which then runs down, then goes across, then cuts across the Eurokent site along the bottom of the image there to Jackie Baker's. The whole idea is that all of these developments are basically have a cycle route and a pedestrian route outside of the road network that goes through to Jackie Baker's. And so that's why there's a contribution there. Obviously the swimming pool is not that far away, and it is the swimming pool that's most going to be affected by this. And then there's obviously the separate contribution. I appreciate the comment with regards to the bowls contribution, but that is, again, it's a thing that pulls out the Sport England calculator. So it's not saying that with any of the open space that's provided, obviously there's two muggers here which would potentially multi-use games areas, so they could be five-a-side pitches, basketball court, etc. And that will all come through the open space strategy across the site. So we do think that's been dealt with. Sport England have given us an updated calculation, 4 weeks ago when I asked them for it. So they know what's happening here, but obviously they raised the objection because they didn't have that commitment from the applicant that the money was going to be provided for sports facilities using their calculator. So we do think when you add that to the rest of the package, that there is sufficient provision made through the contribution towards sports provision that would service this development and would provide a wider benefit as well.
Sorry, just one little bit. So related to what you were saying about Section 106. So a concern that we often have, and I certainly do have, is about we get an agreement, which we have tonight now, got a commitment, we've been told, to 30% affordable housing. We then come to get to heads of terms, Section 106 agreement being put together with various amounts of money for stuff, and then things come back to us that say, oh, well, actually, sorry, we can't actually do all of this and give 30% affordable housing. So the commitment we've been given to 30% housing, what sort of risk would you see that was at? And that really does need to be a commitment. If there's things going to have to give, then 30% affordable housing doesn't need to be at the top of the things that are first chosen to give. There are things lower down. If something has to, there isn't 30% affordable housing. Because I can only speak for myself, but I would not be particularly happy if less than 30% affordable housing was provided on this development.
Neither would I. So the example that I would give in terms of coming back is the 250 houses at Salmston Grange, which is when we had an agreement 2017, say, and then it came back a couple of years later and with viability. We did have the Manston Green development, which originally came forward for 30%, which was, I think, before a number of your time, but that's 800 houses. That came back similarly about viability, which was agreed but never actually followed through in terms of actually changing the 106, and that site's providing 30% affordable housing. On all of the other sites that have been granted strategic allocations, and specifically, obviously, I know the Shottendane Road site obviously went to appeal and obviously agreed a lesser amount. But Westwood Village to the south, 900 houses, 30% affordable housing. Euro-Kent site, 500 houses, 30% affordable housing. As much of a guarantee as we can give that the heads of terms will require the legal agreement to be drafted to provide 30% affordable housing. Once that is written down, it can only be changed after the legal agreement's been done, by full agreement from all parties. Now, there would normally be some provision for alternative, different housing, sort of affordable housing schemes to be provided if there was an issue with viability. So, for example, 50% affordable rent and 50% shared ownership. But ultimately, everyone knows that we need affordable rent, and 30% isn't even hitting the need that's outlined in the local plan. So, this site, as opposed to the Birchington site, is one of the sites that, because of where it's located and because of the fact that they have to provide Nash Road and because of where it is, you don't have a significant amount of infrastructure load in comparison to, for example, Birchington, where you had effectively 3 roundabouts and a brand new local distributed road all the way through. This has got less, so it's more viable, effectively. So, and in terms of your point about why does affordable housing always come first in the list? With the clause that I mentioned about the contribution towards the Manston-Hayne link, the 8 million, that if costs increase from KCC, the shortfall needs to be found, the clause allows for a reapportioning of Section 106 contributions that go to the county alone, not anything to do with affordable housing. And that is because this site is to provide 30% affordable housing. That's what we've put forward.
Thank you. Councillor Wing.
Thank you, and thank you. It was a really detailed report. I mean, I have also a number of concerns. I'll start with, I do think what the NHS have said is an alarming situation. I know it's not a planning issue, that we can't recruit GPs, but we already have one of the highest GP and patient ratios in the area, and I don't think it's something we can dismiss, although it's not, it's sort of not relevant, but it is the big dark cloud that hangs over us all the time, so it's got to be talked about. I also think there's an incredible amount of information, but a lot of it is vague, and that really worries me. Birchington came back to reduce the 30% housing down, I think down to it was just over 15% or just below 15%. So, and I just Googled it. I think we can, in outline planning application, ask for additional information, a greater detail of information. And certainly one of the things I would like to see is a much more detailed assessment of the financial viability of this site. And because there's too many unknown factors, the Nash Road is a problematic. I think you said that the contribution towards the road system won't be triggered until the 800th house is occupied or built. So how does the Nash Road get built? I mean, I'm assuming KCC will cover the cost of the Nash Road until the 800 house is built. Otherwise, we're going to have an incredible problem on Nash Road if the funds are not coming forward, because Nash Road is already, you have to fly by the seat of your pants. You try and avoid that road at all cost if you can. So I've got a number of questions, but maybe you could answer that one. So how does that Nash Road improvement get built if the contribution isn't made until the 800 house? I think that's what you said.
So no, it's not what I said. So the 800th dwelling point is the contribution to the Manston-Hayne link.
Yeah.
So that's the 8 million.
Yeah.
So that's nothing to do with Nash Road in
Yeah.
terms of the improvements. So that is that the total amount of that money is going to be paid before the occupation of the 800th dwelling, with the details of exactly when different payments of that 8 million are paid to be worked out between KCC Highways, ourselves and the applicant through the Section 106 negotiations. In terms of the Nash Road improvements, that's paid for by the applicant. So that comes through. It will need Section 278 agreements with the Highway Authority and potentially in terms of who carries it out, but the applicant is effectively bringing that stuff forward, including the realignment of Nash Road. Nash Road has to be improved, widened in full before any dwelling is occupied that comes off Nash Road. So pretty much you're talking then about 1,161 houses. Of those houses, before any of them are occupied, Nash Road has to be done. In terms of the query about unknowns, there is no financial viability assessment that's been carried out. There's no requirement for one to be carried out under policy either. The only reason why we would ever need a financial viability assessment is if the applicant is saying they can't give us their money that we've asked for financial contributions to mitigate the impact of the development and for 30% affordable housing. The applicant is providing everything that's been asked for by all consultees and ourselves. So there's no need to question it as long as it's enshrined in the 106 and it secures that money to come in and it secures that affordable housing. That is what has to be provided. If, again, there is a problem down the line, viability-wise, then obviously that would only be renegotiated, that Section 106, by voluntary agreement of all parties, that we felt like it was necessary to come forward. And it would ultimately come back to members. Again, anything that is agreed with these sites, in terms of that heads of terms list, if that changes, if suddenly the Section 106 doesn't provide the money for healthcare for whatever reason, and the applicant says they're not going to, it has to come back to members. Now, there's no intention or expectation that sort of thing is going to happen, but the point here is that members are agreeing those bullet points, and if that doesn't get enshrined in the 106, it comes back. If the 106 gets agreed, signed, the development starts going, but actually something's not paid, we enforce the 106. If they want to change the 106, we would consider it the first instance, but it's likely then it would come back to members to consider at that point. Obviously, we may be talking 5-10 years in the future, but ultimately this is about ensuring that the legal agreement secures the heads of terms firmly. I do think that, I understand what you're saying about outline applications do have strategies or strategically look at the site, it doesn't have a level of detail potentially. The outline applications that we're looking at tonight, they would never have a level of detail more than what we've got. They could provide that detail. Ultimately, though, in this instance, there are a significant number of conditions which put a lot of restrictions on stuff that comes forward. We do think with the parameter plans that have been provided and the different strategies for ecology, etc., that does set the baseline that then the reserve matters applications build off. And ultimately, those reserve matters applications can be called in to come to committee, in due course to be looked at. Thanks.
Sorry, I didn't switch my mic off. So I just answer me the question. I believe we can ask for additional and much more detailed information. We can ask that as a planning committee, because I don't think any of us, and we have been here before, Ian, where we've had to, the Birchington one, we had to make that decision, and our hands are forced at that time. We're almost forced into approving the application, even though we're really angry about that they've come back because it's no longer viable and they want to reduce the 30% housing. I come from a teaching background and I'm trying to avoid grief. If I vote in favour of this application, I want to be absolutely 110% certain that I'm not going to be sat here 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, if I'm still here, having a discussion about the reduction of this or that because the site is no longer financially viable. I'd like to see that information to start with. That's what I'd like to make a decision on here. And I'll also come back to the 18% biodiversity net gain. That sounds absolutely great, absolutely fabulous. I'll pat on the back for that. But we've been sat here previously, and it's coming back to us now, where there's been a development has sectioned off a piece of land. They've give this wishy-washy little thing about, they're going to do this, and then we found it's come back, and that condition is now being overturned by an application put on that piece of land. So once again, I want to pin them down, because I don't want to be arguing over whether the bit of concrete is going to be scrubland. I want to pin them down, and I want to know exactly what's going to be put in all those bits that are going to give us the 18% biodiversity net gain, because otherwise we could be sat here and there could be a bit of land that isn't what we think it was going to be now. And Natural England, I think, actually said that there needs to be a bit more details, issues to do with mitigating for the following, and you mentioned it: lizard orchids, breeding birds, skylarks, barn owls, bats, dark corridors, the chalk hole farm, lighting issues on that side. I just want to see more detail. I feel as if I'm asking to make a massive decision on such a little amount of information. The bus route from Ramsgate to Canterbury was just stopped, so I've got absolutely no confidence in any agreement with Stagecoach to run a shuttle bus wherever. I just don't feel comfortable, and this is because I've developed experience of being forced back to applications being resubmitted, and the reason they're being resubmitted is because we made decisions on not enough information to start with. So I would certainly want to see more information about the financial viability of the site, and more information about how the biodiversity net gain, what it's going to look like. And the other thing I'd like to say, 30% social housing, which phase will the 30% social housing be built in? Will we see a percentage of that social housing in the first phase of the development?
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify a couple of points there. So just on the point that you raised about Birchington. So Birchington never came forward with 30% to members, just to be absolutely clear on that. It came forward because on the basis of 15% or 15.5% and 23%, depending on the different scenarios. No, it's a drop, but the point you raised is about whether or not it comes back. And I think, obviously, I outlined about the situations where that has happened, and I just think it's quite important in terms of members understanding that there are changes that occur in the market which may result in things changing in the future. Viability is only ever a snapshot at time, and it is a mechanism to show something, but it's not the reality of the situation of how sites do come forward. They are an exercise in basically working out whether or not the site is viable under the government's terms. In terms of requesting a viability assessment on a development that is entirely policy compliant and is providing, via heads of terms, everything that we are asking for is unreasonable behaviour. So that as a delay to the application, in my view, is unreasonable behaviour. I absolutely understand what you're getting at. The security that actually this ends up providing 30% is something that is of concern. It's of concern to officers as well as members, but that's why it's in the legal agreement. That's a legal obligation to provide it. And if it is to be questioned, then there are safeguards within the legal agreement to ensure that doesn't happen. So I don't think there is no policy test to require a viability assessment to come in. I don't dispute that members, if they felt like they didn't have enough information to consider the application, could request it and could defer the application back. But in terms of providing a viability assessment that looks at it at this point in time, I don't consider that that's going to add anything to the discussion. Members, you're getting what the policy and what consultees have asked for, so it is fully compliant on that basis. In terms of the phasing of the affordable, again, we don't have that detail. And that is something that is also a concern in terms of making sure that we are looking at 30% on each phase as we go through the development. So as part of, again, the 106, you need an affordable housing scheme that comes in that outlines that. Every single reserve matters application is going to have to identify where the affordable housing is. And obviously that will be worked out with the housing team in terms of which areas should provide the affordable housing, which bits are the social housing, which bits are the affordable home ownership products, etc. In terms of biodiversity net gain, again, I understand the perspective that you want to know the precise details. We are at outline stage on a significant scale development. Again, it would be unreasonable for us to require detailed layouts providing where the net gain is going to be provided at this stage. Again, this is kind of enshrined in the new biodiversity net gain legislation about you get permission, and then after the permission, you're required to provide the biodiversity gain plan. It's so that there isn't a stop on development happening until all the biodiversity net gain is sorted. It's so that the permission can be granted, and then it can be formulated as to where it goes as the site comes forward. That's why the KCC ecology comment that we've got, again, from the professional advice that we've got from the qualified ecologist, says that the information that's been provided at this point is acceptable to move forward to the next stage. And the next stage is outlined paragraph in condition 35. It's that there is at appendix 4.1 of the environmental impact assessment basically a strategy for how the improvements are going to happen. Primarily that does relate to the western part of the site, and we looked at the chalk hole and nature reserve point in this area here, but then there is also the structural tree planting that occurs around the site. So again, that, and the condition is quite detailed, that outlines exactly what's required. So you've got updated surveys that are required with the strategy. This has all got to come in before when the first reserve matters application comes in. You get updated ecological surveys. There's basically a review and an update to the actual mitigation plan that's already in on the enhancement plan. Detailed design and working methods to achieve the ecological mitigation requirements, including the chalk hole farm roadside nature area. Extent of works on scaled plans. Source of materials to be used where appropriate, i.e. native species. Timetable for implementation. Person responsible for implementing the works. Subsequent management. All of this information will be provided. It's required to be provided before the condition, and any house builder taking on this site will go straight to these conditions and go, what do I need to do before I put my reserve matters in, so they can effectively tick that off. So in terms of the proposal and the security that the conditions offer, that's why there are so many conditions. I'm afraid I don't agree with the characterisation that there's not a lot of information here. The environmental impact assessment is thousands of pages long and obviously has been looked at by the consultees. But I get the fact that we don't have that precise detail individually now, but it is about setting the framework in place to build off when we get the detailed layouts come in to ensure that it does provide biodiversity net gain.
I think using the term unreasonable behaviour is not acceptable in my view. The consultees are not sat here having to make a decision. We are. And I certainly would like some more information about financial viability, which I'm certain that the applicant will have done, and also a bit more information about the biodiversity net gain. A green area. There's not even any mention of how many trees or hedgerows, the length of hedgerows that will be put in. I don't think that is unreasonable behaviour. You're asking me to make a decision based on a lot of documents and a lot of trust. But I'm the sort of person who wants to see some of this stuff.
I don't have any other speakers. So in that case, we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for, actually it says approval here, it's not, it's defer and delegate, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, do you want me to read out what the recommendation is? Yeah, it's defer and delegate.
To defer and delegate for approval to the vote. Would those in favour please indicate? Those against? And I don't think there were any abstentions, so thank you. The motion is carried. That concludes the business for this meeting. Thank you for your attendance and good night.